Hello and welcome everyone. I'm Aubrey Reeves, CEO of Business and Arts. Before we begin, I'd first like to take a moment to acknowledge that I am a white settler speaking to you from Toronto. I have the honor to be a guest on the traditional lands and waters of the Petun and Wendat peoples and the Anishinaabe and Haudenosaunee confederacies, and most recently, the Mississaugas of the Credit River, as well as many other Indigenous nations, some of whose names are no longer remembered. We acknowledge all who came before us and have traveled the lands and waters of this territory. We're grateful to have the opportunity to work, to live, and to meet on these lands. We'll get started in a moment, but first, just a few housekeeping items. At the end of the session, there will be an open question and answer period, which I will be moderating. Only the presenters and moderators will have our microphones on today, so please submit your questions in the Q&A box early and vote for the ones you think are most relevant. We're also happy to have ASL interpreters Jessica and Misty from Toronto Sign Language Interpreter Service with us here today. The Business and Arts Monthly Speaker Series is presented by Power Corporation of Canada. A big thank you to Power Corporation for all your support in this ongoing series, enabling us to bring these types of conversations to the national discourse. This is our last session of 2022. One of the most talked about issues these days seems to be how to find work-life balance. Employees and employers alike in so many industries are grappling with these questions, but it has really risen to the fore as a defining challenge within the arts and culture sector. So much of the work within the cultural sphere doesn't fall within that traditional 9-to-5 workday, and the demands of creative pursuits have impacts on our physical and mental well-being. Finding that balance becomes even harder when an employee is also a caregiver. And this is what we're focusing in on today, specifically exploring some HR practices and policies that can help retain and support creative workers in the performing arts when they are also caregivers. So let me introduce our first speaker. We have Susie Burpee, and she's the artistic producer of Balancing Act, which I think is a very well-named initiative of Theatre Direct that advocates for and supports caregivers and care needs in the national performing arts sector. Alongside her work at Theatre Direct, Susie is a dance artist who has received Dora Mavor Moore Awards for both outstanding choreography and performance. In 2020, she completed a Master's of Arts in Drama, Theatre, and Performance Studies at the University of Toronto, and she researched and authored Disappearing Act, Dance Artists' Mothers in the Gig Economy of the Performing Arts in Canada. Susie is on the guest faculty at post-secondary dance programs across the country, and she is also a mother of 2 young children. So welcome, Susie.
Thank you, Aubrey. Thank you for that introduction. It's really nice to be here to speak on behalf of Balancing Act. And as Aubrey mentioned, yes, I'm a mother to 2 children who may burst in here halfway through the presentation post-school. So just demonstrating the Balancing Act. I'm also a caregiver to a senior artist, and I am, as Aubrey mentioned, artistic producer of Balancing Act. I'm very honored to be connected with this initiative. This initiative began in 2019. It was founded by Lisa Marie DiLiberto, who is the artistic director of Theatre Direct. Theatre Direct is a theatre for young audiences company based here also in Toronto. And Balancing Act is a national initiative under this organization. The inception really is about Lisa Marie's story of being a young mother and having conversations with other parent artists and caregivers who were struggling to find a balance between their caregiving responsibilities and their working life in the performing arts. And Aubrey has already mentioned some of the challenges faced in this struggle, but some specificities around that are the working schedules, so often long rehearsal days, 10/12s as we'd commonly call them, or the long rehearsal weeks, so 6-day-a-week schedules, particularly in the theater community. Also, the gig contract nature of what we do, combined with high childcare costs, and in general, just a stigma around having caregiving responsibilities, and some artists feeling like they needed to hide those parenting responsibilities away in order to remain available and, available for work and touring. And so Lisa Marie was having conversations, but also focus groups and commissioning a research study around the topic at the same time as organizations were developing their own practices. So here in Canada, arts organizations were starting to bring forward small nuggets of care within the organizations. And globally, there were in particular 2 organizations, one in the UK and one in the US, who had been formed to address these needs. PIPA, Parents and Carers in the Performing Arts in the UK, is one of the organizations. And the other one is PAL, the Parent Artist Advocacy League in the US. And so Balancing Act takes its inspiration from these organizations who are working to change policies and practices within the arts, and also with an aim to uplift and bring together the work that was already happening, that is ongoing here in Canada in the arts sector around caregivers. And I know, Aubrey, you'd asked me to offer up a definition of caregivers. And this is something that that Balancing Act is continuing to work on and develop in our learnings. But presently, we define a caregiver as individuals who care for children, for aging adults, those in need of personal or primary care, and anyone who self-identifies as a caregiver. We acknowledge that care work can include blood, adopted, and chosen families, also colleagues, and there's also the act of caring for others out of duty. So while the initiative grew out of concerns for parents working in the arts, we've quickly expanded our notion of care to include many different kinds of caregivers, as well as ideas around self-care and wiser working practices.
Mm-hmm.
And I just want to acknowledge that we work with an amazing steering committee made up of artistic leaders from across the country, coast to coast to coast. And also I'm part of a team that includes Margaret Evans, producer of Balancing Act, and Saba Akhtar, associate producer, along with Lisa Marie, who remains founder and executive director.
Oh, that's great. So I actually, in preparing for this session, I was looking up, what is a caregiver actually? And in looking around stuff, I came across a quote that basically said, you're either a caregiver or a care receiver, and you're going to be those things continually through your life. It really is all of us at some point, if we're going to be touched by the caregiving role.
Absolutely. Yes. If you're not one now, you may be at some point. Yeah.
So it's no secret that in the past couple of years, it has been very demanding and difficult for caregivers with all the disruptions of the pandemic. And it certainly, we also know that it was a very difficult time for arts workers and artists in the sector. So something I'd like to talk about is implementing a culture of care in the workplace. How would you actually describe what a culture of care is, and how can we bring this into our policies and practices?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you for that question. It's something we've been thinking about a lot at Balancing Act. And again, learning from our partners across the country, we're realizing that the culture of care is developed by leaning on a set of intrinsic values, and that those values include things like compassion and justice, and significantly prioritizing people over product. So we have a book on our Balancing Act bookshelf that we like to quote that is in support of this idea. The book's The Care Manifesto. And it talks about how a caring society is one that acknowledges that our survival is contingent upon one another. So this idea of acknowledging our interdependence and our need to give and receive care. And in this way, we embrace our human frailty. So for us at Balancing Act, it really is about this humanness And as one of our past steering committee members, Kelly Reed, who was executive director at Why Not Theatre, as she said, it's about bringing our fully human selves to the workplace, to what we do. And so with this value set of prioritizing people over product, we then have an underpinning for bringing this culture of care into the policies and practices of the organization. So this set of values sets us up for the necessary conversations with our colleagues, with stakeholders, with board members around the benefit of valuing caregiver support in the organization. And there's been a lot of talk about the care economy, in general, widespread across various sectors in this country. And, that really is about valuing care work, both paid and unpaid, and the way that it contributes to a functioning, thriving society. And so the performing arts, or the arts in general, are a part of that. In order to thrive, we need to have caregiver support.
Mhm. Could you tell us some of the key takeaways and lessons that you've learned from balancing act? Sorry.
Yeah, and I really appreciate this question, because Balancing Act really is a portal for learning exchange. So we are learning as we go, and crediting the artists and the arts organizations that we're partnered with for bringing really interesting ideas and also really palpable concerns to the table. And one of the things that really has been, a sort of a repeat comment in all the rooms and all the circles that we've been engaging with, is our notion of economies of time, and rethinking what capacity we have as arts workers. So how might things be able to shift in order to better support the wellness of the organization and the people we're working with? So a movement away from more capitalist notions of time, so away from high levels of output, and trying to find ways to embrace process-oriented work, or relational work, or even rest. And so there are arts organizations who are doing many things, like 4-day work weeks, hybrid working policies, childcare stipends, these ways that support this new way of working. Because certainly, as you suggested, after the last couple of years, no one, artists, administrators, designers, production teams, everyone's interested in finding a better work-life balance. So we just want to continue to uplift and support these initiatives.
Mm-hmm. So one of the largest programs that you have under Balancing Act is called Level Up. Could you give us a quick overview of this initiative and the work that's being done by some of the organizations that are involved?
Yes, gladly. It's really exciting. So Level Up is a 3-year program, and it's funded in large part by the Federal Feminist Response and Recovery Fund, administered by the Ministry of Women and Gender Equality. So this was a pandemic response fund that acknowledged the attrition of women from the workforce. And we've been able to develop this 3-year initiative and work with performing arts organizations, collectives, and project-based initiatives to pilot strategies that forefront more care-led workplace policies and practices. Through this program, we can offer financial support and consultation. So we work with HR arts consultants or employment lawyers as needed, as organizations are perhaps writing policy or finding new pathways. And we also work with an evaluation team to track our progress. So by the end of the 3rd year, which will be 2024, our aim is to have worked with 70 organizations and to develop policy templates and resource guides, so tangible documents that can be shared widely across the sector in order to be iterated and supportive for organizations. Last year, we worked with 16 theater, opera, and dance companies, and they created all kinds of initiatives. So everything from developing touring infrastructure that supports caregivers, that was Harborfront Center, to writing caregiver policies, crediting Why Not Theatre and New World Theatre out in Vancouver for that. And also piloting alternative rehearsal and production schedules. For instance, Neptune Theatre worked on the production end and Roseneath Theatre on the administrative end. And other companies doing amazing things, and all of that is on the website. They worked within 4 categories. So through our steering committee and other focus groups, we identified 4 key areas. And one was Pathways to Agreement, which was about supporting the caregiving needs through policy development and the contracting process. One was Flexible Working Models. Childcare Solutions was another one. And finally, the Compassion Fund, which we're going to speak a bit about today, which is about including a fund in production or operating budgets to support a range of care needs. So that could include childcare costs, or it could include wellness support or travel or transport. Mm-hmm. And the 4 companies were Nightwood Theatre and Tapestry Opera, pardon me, Buddies in Bad Times Theatre, and we have Daniel here today representing, and also Obsidian Theatre, and Vanessa Spence is here with Obsidian. And I know we're going to speak with them in a moment, but I just wanted to say that by working with these organizations last year, we realized that, care and care supports are not a one-size-fits-all. So their compassion funds looked very different. And this is of great interest to Balancing Act, and I think the sector at large, that we understand that particular communities, particular equity deserving groups, different kinds of regional theaters versus larger organizations, more urban based, will have different ways. And so through the Balancing Act program, we're really trying to learn from all these different ways and to encourage the one size fits one approach. And so this year we have 26 partners, which is incredible, who are using the policy templates created by our year 1 partners as they develop their own work this year. So big thank you to our inaugural partners of year 1. I'm just really looking forward to continuing the journey.
Wow, that's a lot of different performing arts companies of a variety of sizes. So really interesting to see how those policies are adapted and shifts in to their context. So let's learn about 2 of them. I'm going to introduce now our 2 other guests. Vanessa Spence is a classically trained theater actor, producer, emerging playwright, and director. She's a producer at Obsidian Theatre, which is Canada's leading culturally specific theatre company. And she's also artistic director of Virtue Art Theatre, which supports Black artists in regions outside of Toronto. I'm also welcoming Daniel Carter, who is the Interim Director of Operations and Programming at Buddies in Bad Times Theatre. Previously, he worked with organizations such as Summerworks, Visual Arts Mississauga, and Paprika Festival. As an artist, he's worked with companies such as Factory, House and Body, Pandemic Theatre, the Amy Project, and Dopo Lavoro Teatrale. Forgive me if I mispronounced that. Daniel is a graduate of Humber's Arts Management Program and University of Pennsylvania's Social Innovation Design Program. So welcome to you both. Nice to see you. So Susie touched on briefly that you both had compassion funds and as part of the Level Up program. Vanessa, could you tell us a little bit about your compassion fund and how it was implemented at Obsidian Theatre?
Of course. So for Obsidian, the compassionate fund for us is just like a sum of money that's blocked out of their season budget that's set aside with the intention to remove barriers for Black artists or artists who are just working on us within our seasons by supporting those artists with any accessibility needs that they have related to their work with Obsidian. So for the first year, the pilot project that we did with Level Up, a lot of it was focused on childcare, but this can also open up to mental health supports, therapy sessions, also even little things like parking fees, for artists who have to drive into Toronto to rehearse, or even, as small as purchasing a lunch during rehearsals if an artist forgot their lunch, we really wanted to leave it up to whatever the artist needed in order to bring their full selves to the work. And in the implementation of this Compassion Fund, we kind of took a very lax approach with how we share the opportunity with our artists, because we found that sometimes it can be tough for people to accept help in this way. So a lot of it was just kind of through conversation, through talking to our artists, understanding what they needed, and then letting them know that we have this fund that would be able to help, and then asking them if it would be okay if we can help in this way, and that kind of really helped for us anyway. Another thing that we did with the implementation was to kind of help with privacy and transparency. So when we did offer the funds, we didn't ask for anything in return. So a lot of the times we find, when people are offered money, it's, can we get a final report, or can we get receipts, proof of purchase, and that was something that we didn't want to do. We really wanted to exercise the honor system with this project, because we just felt like we wanted to trust the artists that they were going to use the money for whatever they wanted to use it for. And if they didn't, then that's okay, just as long as they're not harming themselves, I think is the most important thing. And lastly, in our implementation, we really wanted to be intentional in making sure that all of the money went to our artists. And that was something that we kind of we were faced with, that, because our artists work with agents, we work with equity. And so if it's a part of their actual contract, then some of that money is not theirs. It's, it goes to fees, it goes to their agent. And so we just wanted to be intentional that whatever money that we offer them out of this Compassion Fund, it goes straight to that artist. And so we offer it outside of their contracts so that folks don't feel like they're entitled to any of that extra money. So yeah, that's kind of what we did with the implementation. But I think a big part of it for us was conversation, talking to our artists, making sure that they felt supported.
Mm-hmm. I think it sounds really important that there wasn't those strings attached on reporting about it. But with my financial management hat on, how did you negotiate that with your auditors? That no receipts.
Yeah, that's a question for our general manager, Michael. But I think we just kind of funneled it through another piece of our budget. So, but this year, because we actually we're growing with the program that we want to have for the Compassion Fund, there will definitely be a more streamlined way that we're gonna share this information with our funders.
Mm-hmm. Great. Okay, so Daniel, my understanding the Compassion Fund looked slightly different at Buddies in Bad Times. Can you share a bit of an overview of how it was implemented at your theater company?
For sure. And like same but different to Obsidian, it sounds like. But we kept our sort of pilot projects pretty specific to a singular production in our season last year. We were working with Manadoon's collective on White Girls in Moccasins, which was part of our season. And what was really lovely working with Manadoon's is that they already had such a grounded idea of what care looks like. And we're already working towards approaching production through a care-centered lens and a very compassionate process. So the sort of pitch or the buy-in was very easy. The entire production team already had a decent level of understanding of like, yeah, I understand this process, I understand XYZ. And I suppose what's also kind of nice is that like within or through a queer perspective, the sort of like exchange of money and like perhaps just give us a receipt and that level of transparency, it kind of already exists. And it's like, yeah, I'll hand over this parking ticket or this whatever transportation expense and I'll get my money back. And so there wasn't so much pushback. That was part of our sort of ask, was that you fill out a form, let us know how much you need, submit your receipts. Only one person in the company, myself, was receiving that, and I was pretty arm's length from the sort of production process itself. So there wasn't really any fear of judgment or reprisal or should I be spending it on this type of thing. We really kept our definition of care as expansive or as broad as possible. Really in the spirit of like treating this as an experiment, that we don't know what people want additional funding for, or where they might sort of want that support throughout this process. We kept the sort of request form open till about 2 or 3 weeks after the production closed itself. And we did receive some requests post closing. And what I think, like looking at that entire process, the production itself was rehearsing throughout February and March 2021. So we were coming out of a pandemic closure. Folks were coming out of like 2 years kind of being out of practice. And I think it's a sort of idea of like your body's just catching up with you. And what we really saw those funds being spent on was for therapy, mostly like physical therapy, massage, etc., and transportation. Especially working with some immunocompromised folks, like having that as an offer, especially coming out of a lockdown, was a big relief for folks.
It seems like there's a really important balance between the transparency on the program and also privacy, that you need to be able to access transparency on how you get at this compassion fund, how you access it, making it really easy to ask for that help, but at the same time protecting the privacy of those who are accessing it about what their needs are, so that they feel comfortable that they can do that. So I'm curious about how you felt these programs went for both of your organizations, how it was received by the people who took advantage of them, and if there was any particular highlights that came out of that. Either of you can jump in.
I'm okay with you going first, Daniel, if you'd like to go.
Oh no, I just forgot to turn off my mic. So if you have an impulse, please.
Definitely. I think that free money and any sort of support is always going to be well received by artists, by anyone really. So yeah, because at the end of the day, like all we need is a boost, you know. And so that's kind of what this Compassion Fund offered to our artists and to folks who are working with us. So in the case of the two of the artists that we helped on a specific show we were helping on, Is God Is by Alicia Harris, that we also co-produced with Canadian Stage and Necessary Angel Theatre. They expressed that they needed to use the funds for childcare, so it was mostly geared toward childcare for us. And you know, what we were asking them to do, it was either full day rehearsals that they needed to be at, or they needed to be fully present during, you know, crazy tech weeks. So the times where we're working 10 out of 12 hours. And those are places that children are not necessarily, you know, they should not be. So that's kind of, they really enjoyed that. And even afterward, we had them write just like testimonials and talking about their experience if they wanted to. And that's kind of what really stood out for them, and what they really enjoyed was just the fact that we were able to help them in this human way, and that they didn't have to hide the fact that, you know, they had become new moms over the pandemic. And this is now something that they have to think about. And, you know, if we want to be able to bring folks back to the theater, that's not only audience members, it's our artists as well. And we want to create a space for them that supports everything that they are, not just them as artists. And so that was very exciting. I think another highlight for me was the fact that the support didn't stop at just offering them money to support their childcare needs. Because we started with those conversations and we asked these artists what they needed from us, you know, we were able to do other things, like, for example, one of the artists needed to pump. And so we offered them a completely separate room outside of the rehearsal hall where they can do that during their off times. And also just kind of creating like a whole environment where they would be able to just kind of be who they are. So even early on in the rehearsals, they were able to bring their kids, you know, because we're not really doing too much like on our feet. So it wasn't just about offering the money and then we expect you to do everything that we ask you to do. It's that fund, that first initial handout was just an opening of a door to say, okay, we opened this door, we're going to support you in this. How else can we support you on site? And that was a really big highlight for me, because it wasn't just about the money. It's more than that always.
Yeah, I'd echo the same. I mean, people were excited. I think people were excited for the peace of mind that the funds brought, that they knew that they would need XYZ throughout this process, and that was covered. Sometimes, depending on like your house size, your production model, producing model, what your production budget is, an artist's sort of weekly fee might just cover the basics, and it's just like, this is what I'm using to get by. So I think this top up just allowed people to really be at ease throughout the process. And sort of speaking to the same thing that Vanessa's saying, it's a bit of a culture shift within the room. Once you introduce this as like an aspect, or that like, yes, we care about you, we care about the project that we're doing, what we really care about is how we're getting there. I think that really opens up the door, as Vanessa said, to more human conversations, to more truth, more honesty, just more realism and realistic expectations leading to the final product.
Yeah, I have a couple more questions, but I just want to remind the audience that we will have time for Q&A. So if you do have any questions for our speakers, please type them into the Q&A box now, and we will get to them shortly. So, but okay, so you had some really great responses from participants, but did you run into any challenges designing or implementing this pilot? Go ahead.
Take it away. Take it away.
I mean, we kind of alluded to it, like the financial management aspect of like, there are a number of ways that you could sort of go about introducing this, and like, how do we prioritize privacy? How do we prioritize what we need at our fiscal year end? And so trying to figure out those nuances was a bit of a challenge in choosing like what to sort of prioritize in terms of like ease of access and what we would actually need to be fiscally responsible. Like, it's a choice, and I don't know if there's any good or bad options out there, but it is very nuanced, and I think it kind of changes depending on what type of community or group of folks that you're working with. So I think having some nimbleness and flexibility in that is useful, period.
Yeah, I second that. Also, oh boy, it just like flew out of my head. I touched on it earlier about offering the funds outside of the contracts. And so that's something that we did come up against, is that, you know, one of the artists went about it through their agent. And so, you know, once you do that, then it turns into a conversation with us, with the theater company and the agent, rather than theater company and the artist. And so that was a challenge that we came up against, that we weren't really thinking about in the beginning. So then after that, we kind of had to just think intentionally about how are we going to frame, how are we going to communicate and frame this fund to our artists, so that they don't feel the need to have to, you know, tell their agent, so that 100% of the money can go straight to them, and they have the agency to do whatever they need to do with the funds, rather than having to give a portion of it out to whoever. So that was a challenge, and moving forward, that's something that we want to just continue to think about and do with intention, so that we can truly take care of these artists. And also just like a more macro challenge is, you know, something that we're all dealing with in the industry right now, is just the lack of people power, the lack of human resources that we have right now in the industry. It's really tough. And so I think it's just wonderful that we have these programs, and that we are finally like opening our minds and our hearts and our arms to programs like this. But in order to continue to implement these programs with intention and with the mind of sustainability, we need people, and we need people who truly care and who want to see this grow in the industry. And so that was just something that we definitely came up across, because this is something new, you know, and because we're doing this in a kind of post-pandemic world, if I can call it that, there are just layers of things that we didn't have to account for 3+ years ago. And so a lot of these awesome programs are coming up, and we want to do this and we want to help, but the people power, the human power is just not there at the moment. And so, yeah, that's just kind of like a macro issue. But other than that, it's great.
So I see some questions coming in, but I wanted to ask you, Susie, if you could tell us a little bit about the other 3 streams. So you said there was the Compassion Fund stream, but then there was these 3 others. Could you maybe give us a brief overview of some of the stuff that happened in those?
Yes, glad to. The Pathways to Agreement strategy was largely about writing policy to support caregivers. New World Theatre developed a framework of care. So a policy that responds to caregiver needs and accommodations. Why Not Theatre wrote a similar caregiver policy. And so we worked very closely with Lesage Arts Management, Jeanne Lesage, as an HR consultant for creation of those policies, as well as an HR employment lawyer to navigate the territory between accommodations and benefits and the legalese around that. It was really nitty-gritty work, and it's amazing what was developed by these companies. Toronto Dance Theatre also created an internal assessment process for their employees and contracted artists to figure out then how to build their policy. Flexible working models was, as I said earlier, on the production end, but also the administrative end. So things like 4-day work weeks, lengthening rehearsal schedules to allow for a little bit more time. And interestingly, just to say that this is leading into a lot of questions around long-term planning, season planning, budgeting, and acknowledging that venued organizations have certain demands on them if they need to have income rental, as a part of their financial plan. So this continues to be something we're looking at, and we're looking at it alongside means of production, which is a network of technical directors and production managers, independent. And we're also looking at it along with companies who are helping us to maybe develop templates for this longer forecasting. So that was 2. The third one, childcare solutions, is we're now calling care solutions for this upcoming cohort. So acknowledging that some of these sort of tangible care supports might extend into, yes, caring for children, but also elder care or supporting those with disability. And so things like that, where caregiver, or things in that category were caregiver stipends, supporting childcare alongside a program. And actually this fall, one of our new partners, Common Boots Theatre and Two Birds Theatre, came together to create a program that had supported childcare. And then they actually wove those children into the end of the production. So it was a pilot to see if they could combine their content with this audience support. And the 4th, last year was Compassion Fund, but we've added a 5th this year, which is Models for Presenters. So lots of conversations around support for touring artists, support for visiting artists. And just yesterday, we were in a room together with Tim Walker from Harbourfront Center and Deborah Johns from Oakville Center for the Performing Arts, speaking about building a resource document that could support folks visiting their venue, caregiving needs, but also thinking about international artists and what they might need to know about our cities, about our communities, in order for them to feel as safe as possible. So it's really interesting work that, again, is extending beyond, childcare. So self-care, just different working practices that make, as Daniel and Vanessa have been saying, that just create more ease for the artists and arts workers.
Yeah. So Daniel, you did your Compassion Fund as part of one particular project. Do you see Buddies in Bad Times going forward with that for future projects?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think it was such a gift to be asked to be involved in that sort of first year of this pilot program, because it really showed us like the methodology to how to set it up. So moving forward, like, yes, sort of putting aside a percentage of our production budget year over year and sort of shifting that where necessary for the various projects that are coming in. And I think it might feel like a bit of a scope creep at first, or like, how should I do this? But I think Nightwood Theatre really sort of put it into perspective of like, yeah, this 1% of this budget is going to go towards this. And I think if you just start off like with that very specific, tangible figure, it just shows you the sort of strengths and weaknesses, and you could go from there. Like,
Yeah.
We're just starting out. Does not need to be perfect.
Right. And Vanessa, from participating in the Leveling Up program, are there any of the other initiatives you learned about from some of the other programs that you feel like you're going to put into play at Obsidian?
By other initiatives, do you mean like the other streams, or?
Yeah, the other streams that you might
Okay.
want to pursue some of those.
I don't know. I would like to. I would like to explore all of them. But I like, one thing I do know is I'm going to keep asking questions, right? And I'm going to keep sharing the resources when other folks ask questions. I'm going to continue creating community, because things like this need to happen. Supports like this need to happen for our artists. And I think all theater companies want to do this. So I'm not going to try to do it in a silo. I'd like to ask questions, spread the word. Hey, how did you do this? Oh, we're doing it like this. Do you think there's a better way to do this? Really, really talk and communicate and have that conversation, just so that we're not all trying to do the same thing in different places.
Yeah. So we have a question and comment from the audience. This one person says, great initiative and insights. Coming back to structural issues such as the 6-day work schedule and 10-hour days, etc. Do we see major companies or a majority of companies making these changes? Do we imagine we can realistically get to a place where the financial, logistical, scheduling environment supports a true culture of care for all arts workers? This would mean a wholesale change of culture and expectations within the financial implications attached to it. All right, I see a lot of heads nodding.
Oh, Susie, if you want.
Oh, no, go ahead, Dan.
That's a real issue. Like buddies, we're moving away completely from the 10 out of 12 work days. So we're extending our production timelines, which means a decrease in rental revenue. And so it's a huge ripple effect. And coming out of COVID, going into this economic downturn, like the industry may take 2 or 3 years to actually recover. It's kind of scary to think about and to sort of make that choice. But a lot of the positives that have come out from that is the de-siloing of departments within the company, better planning, longer planning timelines, and a preparedness sort of moving into season to season, project to project, where we have become much more accommodating. Folks are less burnt out, less stressed, which means that that time can then be shifted towards new development opportunities, different areas in which we could leverage how our venue might be used. Other things that sort of fill in those gaps. So yeah, it's a big, somewhat scary thing, but I do think, or can see in the long run, how it's going to really pay off.
Yeah, we have a second, more of a comment. There's an affinity of interest linking arts for caregivers initiatives alongside arts for mental health initiatives, which have real measurable benefits related to self-care and general well-being. So an FYI, more can be found about that research at artscare.ca. So I have one final thought. We do, according to an Ontario Arts Council report in 2018, women represent 52% of artists in Ontario and 51% of culture workers in Ontario. And I'm fairly sure that that's similar across the rest of the country. So while the creative workforce overall is fairly even in terms of the number of men and women, we still see senior leadership positions dominated by men, especially as we move up in the terms of size of organizations. Meanwhile, we also know that the bulk of caregiver responsibilities are still falling to women's shoulders in a lot of households. So how can changes in policies like what we've been talking about today lead to greater gender parity and equity in the arts and culture workforce in the future? Susie.
I'll jump in. Thank you for that question, Aubrey. And thanks to Mike for that link in the chat about linking arts caregivers and mental health. But yes, I mean, we know from all the data accrued over the pandemic that that women, non-binary, cis and trans women, and women from racialized Indigenous communities have been disproportionately affected. And so the work that we're doing is based on that data dovetailing with arts data that we know around still needing to gain some ground around women in arts leadership. And so our response around that is to work with these programs, but to have the underpinning still through the lens of these two streams of data. So who's in the room? What kind of projects are we looking at, and who is this affecting? And there are largely women in these rooms. We have a Balancing Act has an affinity group program that we also run the third Mondays of every month. And so that brings together arts caregivers who come and they want to discuss concerns or challenges or share resources. And those rooms are largely populated by women. But we're also recognizing that, that there are many different performing arts allies out there, and that conversations, between all kinds of folks of not just different genders, but different sizes and scopes of organizations, different communities, regional, remote. These are all sort of what feed into having an intersectional look at what we're doing. End of thought.
Wonderful. Vanessa, Daniel, do you have any final thoughts you'd like to contribute? No? Okay, well, then I will say a huge thank you to everyone involved in another fascinating discussion as part of our speaker series. Thank you so much to Susie Burpee for leading such an important initiative and telling us about it today. Thank you both to Daniel and Vanessa for sharing your own experiences from within Buddies in Bad Times and Obsidian Theatre. Finally, I'd like to say a big thank you to Business and Arts Speaker Series presenting partner Power Corporation of Canada. Every month, Business and Arts invites industry leaders from across the business and arts sector to share advice, insights, and best practices. It has been a privilege to help bring these types of conversations to the fore nationally, and we hope everyone here today has found it to be enriching. And I also hope to see everyone again next year in 2023 for our next year of programs. So visit businessandarts.org to learn more about upcoming speaker series webinars and other programs. And you can also follow us on social media for the latest news. Thank you, everybody, and have a wonderful new year.